Cool. Hello, everyone. I'm David. I'm a senior product manager at Booking.com. My team works on what we call the connected trip. So that is when you book an accommodation or any other kind of product that Booking has, we kind of offer you the opportunity to then upsell or cross-sell to a second vertical. So book an accommodation, get a flight, those kind of things. So growth is a topic that I'm kind of very interested in terms of how we grow our individual businesses and like all of those businesses together. I'm joined by Stuart and Stephen. I'll let them kind of introduce themselves. Stuart, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi everyone, my name's Stuart. I'm a senior product manager at a company called Accurix. Accurix is a healthcare communication company that makes software for the NHS. We have a lot of adoption in GP practice, general practice in the UK. My team specifically are looking at trying to grow adoption in secondary care settings, so hospitals, acute trusts, so that we can allow communications across the entirety of the NHS.
And Stephen?
Hi, thanks. I'm Stephen, based in Berlin, for a company called Heycar, automotive marketplace with various operations in Barcelona, Berlin, London, and now also recently in Paris and Amsterdam, funnily enough. And I've been obsessing about marketplace product for roughly 10 years. Great to be here. And I'm a bit scared seeing so many people in one room. So if I come across as funny, that's probably the reason.
Okay. Cool. Okay, awesome. So I think maybe to kick off with, let's talk about kind of how we define growth. So obviously it means many different things, many different people. I think maybe Booking.com growth is kind of a very, it's large numbers. We're kind of looking at, millions of customers per day, whereas smaller companies maybe starting to go 1 to 10 is kind of, again, huge growth. I guess, Stuart, maybe within your organization, how do you define growth?
Sure. Interestingly, in our org, we've almost got the two sides of it, not quite Booking.com numbers, but with reference to the NHS, obviously you've kind of got the cap of the market is around a sort of 1 million employees that you can effectively get. But in primary care, we have the scenario now where we're trying to, our growth is depth of use of our products, because we have effectively capped out weekly active practices and users. So we are trying to grow the amount they're using those products to keep them as engaged as possible on those products. Whereas you then look at the other side, which is the sort of not quite 1 to 10, but we certainly were at the 1 to 10 point of actually getting our first users, getting our first 10 users, getting our first 100 users in hospitals. And for us, that then flips much more into the, we just want users doing anything on our product. For us, that is sending messages to either GPs or patients. We don't really care how many a day at this point in time. We just want to get them weekly active so that we have more people on. And we, obviously across each one of those products through time have had to evolve what we define as growth at any point in time for each of those products.
Cool. And Stephen, I guess same question to you. How does growth exist in your world?
We really try to spread it across multiple teams, right? So I think for every single team being cross-functional, they might have a different aspect of growth that they cover. I also find that in general, it's hard for people to define what growth means. You talk to a super commercial person and they would just say, the money curve up and to the right. And then you speak to product managers and they have some really niche metric that they are desperate to grow that doesn't really do any impact to any business. So it's a hard one.
Yeah.
But maybe we'll touch a bit more on what that means later on in this chat.
Sounds good. Okay, and I guess just to follow up as well then, so how do you measure these things? What processes and tools do you kind of follow to kind of keep track of whether these are niche or these are sales metrics?
Yeah, it becomes also extra complicated if you have multiple teams in multiple countries with multiple cultures that develop, where some of those teams might be obsessing about, engagement figures, and they have their own way of measuring engagement. But how to do that centrally, I think, is really to understand what's what we call Northern Star metrics, understand that everyone will be held accountable for those. And then I think it really helps to have especially in a marketplace environment where you're really looking at consumer-facing metrics, to have some sort of truth definition that's shared by everyone. So there's not a sort of a debate about what active means or which tool you're using to measure active usage or listings or anything like that, but rather centralized, let's say, agreed upon method of doing it so that we're all held accountable for the same thing.
Yeah, I think that's super important to like have the same definition across different teams. So like, this is what growth is, and then we're all talking about the same number, so we know if that goes up or down. You can have a sensible conversation about how that changes. Cool. And maybe Stuart, like, how do you know you're optimizing the right thing?
Interesting question. Certainly something we've sort of debated internally back and forth a few times. I think we, certainly in our sort of 1 to 10 to 100 in the hospital side, we're benefiting from what we learned from the GP adoption to begin with. So certainly there it was sort of cool, or you just want a practice to like download your products and like send their first message, or do you want them to send their 20th message because that means they're going to be retained in the long term, and then obviously you have no growth without retention effectively. Mm-hmm. So at the moment we are basically trying to do a similar thing in the secondary care space. So if we learn a lot in the next year, 18 months, we might well have to change that so that actually it's not messages sent, it's records viewed, or it's anything at all that we may then have to adapt.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And I guess, Stuart, maybe, Stephen, sorry, because you're kind of further up the chain as a CPO, how do you kind of set growth targets? Like, how do you do that for your teams or for kind of your world?
I've tried all approaches. So the completely bottom-up one, where you give a bunch of people multiple months to do something as accurate as possible. The other one is just finding inspiration to pick a large number. And then I think maybe the in-between one would be how to give somewhat guidance of what makes sense for where you are as a business in terms of maturity, and then sort of comparing that with some, let's say, continuous rolling forecast. Usually that third one makes the most people also sort of buy into the process, which I think is ultimately what you want, is not so much what a metric makes sense in the end, because customers will decide, right, whether you're delivering value or not. Yeah. But you do need teams to be motivated and feel some sort of agency. And without that feeling of agency, it becomes quite difficult for them to then say, well, we'll be chasing this metric or that one.
Yeah. And how, I guess, open question to both of you, how do you balance something that is more strategic versus something that's kind of, more sales, more kind of measurable?
Yeah, I think on that strategic ones, it's often a case of that you feel that your business has to be at some point. I think especially if I'm talking to other execs, there's a narrative that's developed and over time, and you feel that your company now needs to be at a certain point, given the amount of years or time or money invested. And that's one of it. But then I think for some of the teams, they desperately need product leaders that can translate that high level, let's say hand-wavy type metric into something that makes sense for a OKR planning or a weekly sprint even. Yeah. And what would that proxy metric or what would that difference be? It's something that you have to sort of coach your product teams into providing, and also to sort of translate that top level metrics.
Yeah. Yeah, I know at Booking, so we're using kind of a fairly standard OKR framework just to enable us to kind of tie like the lowest level story of what we're doing back up to the highest level goal. And I think if you can build something like that, where you've got this kind of connection, like a tree, or a pyramid maybe that comes out from kind of the very top line metric into something that's lower level, looking at also things like counter metrics. So if we build this feature and it creates, 100 new bookings per day, but also creates 20 custom support tickets, like maybe that's not like a good trade-off we want to make. And I think if you can have those metrics measured and understand the trade-offs between those things, that's something we're really kind of cognizant of, is that we need to make sure that we're not just adding bookings but causing a lot of pain somewhere else in the organization, that actually like isn't growth, or it's like fake growth, in that we're creating one metric up and one metric is kind of going down. I think is really important for us. So I guess going back to the kind of the overall topic of the session is like, who owns growth? I guess, Stuart, who owns growth in your organization?
Again, I feel like I'm saying this often, but it's quite an interesting one at the moment. We are sort of benefiting from the success we've had, so we're now 180 people. I think in the ideal world, I would say everyone in the organisation owns growth. If that's ultimately what you're aiming for, it can't be siloed to one team. But again, this evolves over time. Obviously, if you're at Facebook, not everyone's going to be saying that they own growth themselves. Certainly back predating me at this company, it was even our sort of CEO and founder, when they were 20, 30 people, was physically writing handwritten letters out to practices to try and get them on, doing things that don't scale across the board. Now, I would say we're still doing quite well at trying to keep everyone involved and saying we're all pushing for this same one goal. As you said, you've got your top goals that filter all the way down, even support teams, customer success, account managers. In reality, that probably doesn't always happen because you get these competing metrics. But in the ideal case, I would say it should be everyone at your org is bought into the one growth goal. But I'd be certainly interested. I know Heycar's expanded beyond the sort of 300, 400 mark, how that now works in reality at a much bigger org.
Nice segue. No, I think the reality is the same. And even if you scale it, the challenge is actually to scale your culture in a way. So you might have the smaller teams that were successful, and from that expansion was unlocked. And then you have new teams coming on board, and suddenly you have a lot of organizational debt to pay, new kinds of teams like sales teams and customer service teams that don't necessarily obsess the same way as these, let's say, multi-hat wearers of the beginning did. And then how do you scale that? It really becomes a challenge. Even if I'm seeing the way we are product managers now, some PMs they're focusing on a checkout, and for them growth is really something that they are sort of iterating on. And then you have others who are using qualitative data and saying, oh, goodness me, we have to think a bit differently how we present this message to customers. Buying a car online seems daunting, to say the least. So how do you communicate that well? That becomes almost social science. And I think scaling this, let's say, growth culture across people with totally different personality profiles, different experience levels, it's super daunting, and it's hard to say who really owns it. It's more a case of, does the management believe that everyone should be owning it, and do they believe that hard enough to go and drive that?
Just to go back onto one of the points you made there of qualitative growth. Like, I think quantitative is like you said, number goes up and to the right, good. Opposite is bad. How do you deal with something like qualitative product growth? Like, how do you measure that?
The previous speakers mentioned so much about all these books, right? So the books will give you this amazing story about how to do this and how to do interviews. And I think Teresa Torres is the closest we get to, let's say, best practice on how to use these qualitative inputs. But the challenge for any product leader or any person that looks after multiple things will be, how do you differentiate the signals, and at what time do you want to internally share qualitative data versus quantitative to make sort of trade-off decisions as a PM. So if you're having a strong, let's say, feedback from 5 customers that you had in an interview room that says this needs to go or that needs to change, then how does that compete with the numbers that might say, oh, 3% extra is better? So I think that's something that you as a PM have to evaluate, and you have to sort of find an experimentation framework where you can actually test both against each other and then see what happens. Because ultimately, again, I'm of a firm belief that the customer ends up deciding how we grow, not our smart presentations or PowerPoints.
Yeah, I think as well, just combining like the quantitative data will tell you what, and then the qualitative will tell you why. I think you need to balance that, right? Have kind of both sides of the coin. Otherwise, you'll never kind of iterate your way or A/B test your way to kind of like the next amazing thing. You need to talk to people and find out kind of what they actually mean, why they're doing certain things, to really back up your hypotheses. Awesome. Okay, the question I wanted to touch on as well was maybe Stephen, your perspective from kind of the kind of C-level versus individual PM. So I guess from your point of view, kind of what metrics are you looking at that maybe have changed since you were kind of not a C-level kind of PM or product person? Yeah,
I think in the past it was all about, there's some metric and then it has to be applied like butter across the whole organization. So you would have people obsessing about the results of certain A/B tests or how conversion rate looks like. And that has definitely changed to understanding that the whole product's conversion rate is a factor of supply, demand, even how your product is being designed, which I think wasn't really talked about a couple of years ago. Now it's more and more becoming the this, let's say, completely a cross-functional thing.
Yeah. Okay. And how do you communicate that like upwards to your kind of like other people on the C team or even the stakeholder, the shareholders perhaps?
I think that's super hard to communicate it to let's say, technical shareholders or stakeholders, because they would want to, in their world, it's always revenue growth, almost always, and that's a very well understood financial market discounted cash flow model Excel sheet, which is for most people, that's in product boring, if I may say that. So how do you translate what customers are saying? I think it becomes more and more a story of using those customer insights, those qualitative insights that maybe didn't you thought in the past as a product leader, goodness me, am I going to make a decision on n equals 5? But now suddenly those, let's say, tidbits become quite good supportive structures when you're talking to shareholders and explaining why you've done certain things and why certain things have worked and why it's not worked.
Yeah. Bit of context is key. Okay, and then Stuart, I kind of want to touch on a bit on kind of what things kind of, I call it growing pains, like if we're talking about growth, what are the things that, like, what are the challenges you have in your product to kind of stop it growing?
Plenty, sadly. We are operating in the medical space, which rightly so is quite heavily sort of regulated, and the sort of end users that we're trying to attract are, as I'm sure we all know, in every healthcare system in the world, incredibly strapped right now for time more than anything. And that in itself is just a huge blocker, because nobody gets into medicine to work on a computer. No one does. So it's how do you try and convince them that actually the IT that you're working with right now is one of the problems, even though it's never an immediate problem to them because somebody's dying in front of them in the worst case. But trying to educate them, it sounds a bit sort of arrogant to say that, but educate them that actually this is a problem you're facing, and if we were to solve this for you, then you could save sort of 10, 20, 30, 40 minutes every single day, which you could then give to delivering a better patient care. So that for us is probably one of the biggest problems to growth that we've seen. Is one, they don't realise that this is actually is a huge problem that could be solved for them, and two, very few of them have the autonomy or the time to be able to go and figure this out themselves, because it is so regulated by their chief clinical information officers and the people who run the hospitals.
Okay, cool. Makes sense. Stephen, I was going to ask you, does growth always mean adding more features?
Definitely. So that's it. No, definitely not. I think it's this classic civil engineering mentality that's unfortunately still in a lot of companies, right? So you're thinking, if we don't do something with our time and build something new, then what's the point of existing? But I think the more educated product leader would also think of that as an opportunity to go and talk more to customers, find out more in initiatives that maybe in the past didn't do as expected, and maybe going back to them and iterating on them instead of just always adding new and building the Franken product.
Yeah. I think definitely I've seen in my career before, like just being very afraid of becoming like a feature factory and just turning out more and more things, plugging stuff into it, and you get this kind of Rube Goldberg machine of horrible product that does a million things but nothing well. It's much better to focus on pick your top 3 things and absolutely nail those and be really good at those. Yes, maybe Stuart, again, this is definitely your world. How do you grow your product when there are regulatory complexities? Obviously, medical is very regulated.
Yeah. I mean, certainly the way we've approached it is you approach it like the regulatory constraints is like a product problem. Like everything, I guess, is a product problem. You go and say, this is a problem we need to solve. You ask, as Mark was saying earlier, you ask why as many times as you can to figure out what the root causes are. And then what I would say, we as an organisation, I can't take much credit for this because there's plenty of wonderful people at the could do this. Go and build those relationships with the necessary people. At the end of the day, you're selling to people, whatever your product is, it's people are the end consumer. Go and speak to those people and figure out what they need, what will satiate their concerns, and how you pass that through regulation, or can you change that regulation because it might be outdated. So it's very much those conversations that need to be had all the time. And I think it's a theme coming out through this morning. You can't do that by sitting behind your computer all the time, or certainly you couldn't. Now maybe you can because there's Teams and there's Google Meets, but certainly going face to face is much better.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. I want to finish up there because I want to leave a bit of time for questions. I've seen some come through on the Slido. Just to summarize, kind of a key takeaway. I think for me it would be pick your North Star metric and kind of build like a pyramid or a tree that kind of comes off that, and you can tie things back to. I think that's the most important thing. It always gives you ability then to kind of connect what you're doing back to the original goal and really see how the smallest low-level feature can tie back to that overall kind of chain of things that you're working on. Stuart, maybe?
In terms of the takeaways, we haven't fully touched on it, but it's something that we certainly have talked about in the company as well, is don't bother with growth until you've got product market fit, and don't bother with growth until you have that retention curve that flattens out. If you do, you'll be pumping people in the top, spending a lot of money to get people in, and they'll just be falling straight out the bottom because you haven't found value in what your customers need.
Okay, and Stephen?
True measurement is hard. Make sure that you align those truths with everyone in the organization so they know what you're measuring.
Cool, awesome. All right, let's move on to the questions. We've got a few here. Is growth always the most important thing? ...
I can go for the non-C-suite, non-interacting with the board member of saying no, but I'm in the privileged position, which I'm probably sort of shielded by that all the time. I think it depends what your North Star metric is. If that's ultimately what you're going for as an org, then yes. If it's not, and you're going for customer satisfaction, or you're going for whatever it might be, like you can maybe skin that as that's growth in customer satisfaction, so it's semantics at that point, but it really depends what your sort of metrics tree, if you want to call it that, is set.
Yeah, just one sentence. I promise you, for Craigslist, growth was never the most important thing, and they were $1 billion company years ago. So it's not always the most important thing. It's more a case of what do you want to be. If you can influence what your company wants to be, if it is about sustainably planting trees all across the world, then you would still have a growth mission because you want to plant a lot of trees. So think about what that means for your company and in that context, and then decide whether that is indeed the most important thing. If it's just for you and your family to run a shop, then growth might be a terrible thing because running multiple shops might split your family apart. So again, that would be a bad thing. So it absolutely requires context.
Cool. Okay, next question. How are input metrics that contribute to a North Star metric operationalized in specific teams? Any examples you can share? I guess I can give a kind of my 2 cents on this. So I think for Booking anyway, or at least the area I working at Booking, I won't say it depends because it's like product manager bingo, but like if my team is very like back end focused, so we're essentially building the API that lets us do cross sell from vertical 1 to vertical 2, so flights to cars or something. And for that, like we don't have very much like customer facing metrics per se. We have kind of like operational kind of system metrics. So for our team, uptime, reliability, latency, those kinds of technical metrics are things that we kind of care about. But all of those things kind of connect to the North Star metric for our area, which is like increase the number of bookings that we make for our customers make, for these different verticals. And so how we kind of contribute to that is like we cannot. There's no point being able to grow the number of bookings that someone makes if we can't serve them the products in the speed that we need to be able to deliver that experience. So for us, like that's how we connect kind of the speed of our API, the speed of how quickly we can respond to that, back to something that an actual booking number that we're aiming to optimize. Anything for you guys?
You said it well.
Yeah.
The most practical example would be to decide how you set targets and to find a way that your product managers can actually communicate this to teams. So if you want a practical example, that might be OKRs back to sprint level goals and see if you can tie the two together. And if you can, nice. If you can't, well, then probably going to have hard conversations next time around for planning.
Cool. Okay, maybe just the last one possibly because we're just coming up to the end of time. In an organization of 1,000 plus, not everyone can own growth, especially when it's not already in the company DNA. In that case, who initiates growth and owns it?
I want to ask the question asker if they set the question up so that the answer could be product, because in this case you can make a good case that product should own it because you care about making growth. I still think that in an organization of 1,000 plus, potentially you would have some teams that will be repressing growth, not because they are instructed to, but because they have to do legal or regulatory checks like in Stewart's organ. They might be preventing stuff from rolling out and can therefore be deemed as a team that prevents growth. And I think us as product need to definitely understand our role in this of not making them the scapegoat, but rather saying, what do we need to do in order to choose our process or our features better, that this is not a hampering for growth. So I know the question was asked slightly different. I apologize for dodging that. But I do believe that trying to put this into a bucket, it might be a problematic approach.
Give a hand to our panel.